Hey guys, welcome to grade 5-6. Alright, where I grew up, the roads are very straight. In Saskatchewan, most of the roads are pretty much dead straight. You might come around a bend, but you could probably then see straight roads for a couple kilometers ahead, right? Well, where I went to college, different story. The roads are very not straight. It was in the mountains, and the road had to curve around lakes and go up and down through valleys and find their way through mountain passes. It makes things a lot slower. Actually, guys, I looked it up on my phone, on a map, and from Calgary, it's 842 kilometers to my hometown. And it's 530 kilometers to Salmon Arm when I went to college, and yet most of the time, it takes about the exact same amount of time to get to each place from Calgary. Isn't that crazy? When my BC friends come out to the prairies, they complain how the roads are so straight and boring. When my prairie friends talk about BC, they complain that the roads are so slow and that they make them car sick going around all those bends. So which one is it? Should the roads be straight or should they be curvy? Well, I guess that all depends on where you grew up. In this case, neither is good or bad. They have different purposes. But what it does show is that there are two ways of looking at the world. One thinks curvy is the right way, and the other thinks that straight is the right way. So, which one is it? Well, this got me thinking about our bad words of the Bible for this week, iniquity, which describes a world that's bent and broken and actions that are bent and broken. Sometimes we get used to things being so crooked, we figure that's just the way they should be. It's normal to us. And yet the writers of the Bible look at the world with God's eye view. And what they see is something that is crooked and wrong. They see a world that God meant to be straight and fair and even and just, where people love each other and everyone's treated equally. And that's not how our world often is. Sometimes we don't even notice it because we are so used to the road being crooked. And that's what this week's weird, bad word of the Bible means. Crooked or bent out of shape. Alright, iniquity might seem like a weird word, but the idea describes a world bent and broken and God's loyal commitment to make the world straight again. The second half of our class today, guys, we're going to look through the Bible and see how the writers of the Bible use the word iniquity. But let's understand the big picture first, all right? Has anyone ever done anything that you felt was unfair? How did you feel? Can you think of examples of wrong things people have done? Have you hurt someone else, stolen something? Have you ever done something that was wrong? How did you feel? Well, the Bible uses a funny word to describe some of these things. We've talked about some of these words: sin, which describes moral failure and evil in the world, and transgression, which describes doing something that breaks trust with somebody else. And today we're talking about iniquity, which describes something that's supposed to be straight, but instead is bent and broken. What kind of person do you think is like a crook? Maybe some guy in like a striped prison suit, or somebody who steals a car, the bad guy in a movie. There are people who do crooked things, which says that there's a right way to live and treat other people, so the way that they are living is crooked or broken. It's not supposed to be how we're supposed to act. For example, stealing a set of AirPods is a crooked way of getting AirPods. The straight way of getting them is to go to the store and pay for them. Almost everybody agrees stealing's wrong. It's an act of iniquity because it's selfish and it's hurtful. But there are other things that are called iniquity, like being prideful, or being selfish, or being untruthful or deceitful. We might not think of these things as bad as stealing or murder, but the writers of the Bible think these things are the cause of evil in the world because they aren't the way that God made the world to be. For example, I got my hockey stick here. Now, I don't know if you guys ever played floor hockey in gym class. When we would go to play floor hockey, we'd take the sticks, and they're all straight, right? So we'd go and bend them, and our gym teacher would yell at us. I'm right-handed, so I would, go like this, get a nice curve in it. Look at that, decent curve there. Now that's a good kind of bent out of shape because it helps me shoot better. But what if instead of curving the blade, I came up and I was like, all right, I got my stick. Ah! Oh no, it's broken. It's bent out of shape. It's not the way that it's supposed to be. How am I supposed to play hockey with this thing now? It's It's bent and broken out of shape so that it doesn't work properly. And that's kind of the picture that the Bible gives of iniquity, something that is bent and broken out of shape so it doesn't work the way that God designed it to. In Genesis, in the beginning of the Bible, God makes this perfect world and he calls it very good. But when the first humans choose to mistrust God and define what is right by their own rules, they broke the perfect world God made. It's like God made this nice straight road, but we prefer the curvy road. Problem is, if you make a turn on a straight road, you're going to go into the ditch. And humans, apart from God, become so crooked that we think acting in crooked ways is straight. The way we act and see the world has become so crooked and broken, we don't even know what it would be like to live straight in God's world where everyone's treated as valuable and we trusted God's way instead of our own. It's like Judas, one of Jesus' best friends, who was so greedy for money that he betrayed Jesus just for a bag of silver. And only afterwards did he realize how wrong he was and that Jesus was the one who was right. Alright guys, have you ever heard the word judgment before? It's usually not used in a good way. People are like, don't judge me. But the way that writers of the Bible use the word is so much different. When God judges someone or something, it's God letting them carry the weight of their own bad decisions. Have you ever made a bad decision and had to suffer the consequences? Sometimes the language of the Bible sounds offensive to us when we hear something like, God judges iniquity. But what that means is that God lets us choose if we're going to live straight or crooked. And when we choose crooked behavior, he lets us carry the weight by ourselves. Have you ever tried to lift something really heavy all by yourself? Well, I'm not a big guy, but I see these guys in the gym and I've been watching some YouTube and I don't know, I think I can do it. I think I could be a bodybuilder. What do you guys think? Let's give it a try. All right, here we go. Lifting something heavy. I can do it. I don't need help. Ugh. Ready? Oh yeah, I got this. Help! Help! Oh no! So biblical punishment, guys, isn't God waiting to lightning bolt people for doing things that God doesn't like. God's punishment is letting us carry the weight of our own crooked decisions on our own. Imagine if God never judged crooked decisions. That would be really bad because crooked people would get away with evil things. But that brings us to another Bible-y word, guys. Forgiveness. God is loyally committed to making the world straight again. He doesn't want it to be crooked because that causes hurt and evil. And the picture of God's forgiveness is that he offers to carry the consequences of our iniquity, the consequences of our crooked behavior. Have you ever done something really crooked? Let's use just like a totally silly example, all right? Say your mom baked a bunch of cookies for your family to watch for a movie night. But when you got home, no one was watching. And so you ate them all. Oh, guys, this one time I ate 14 chocolate cookies in 5 minutes, totally by accident, and they were just so good. I felt so sick. Well, there would be iniquity because the cookies were meant to be shared by everyone at movie night. And you feel really guilty, but instead of making you go and buy more cookies with your own money, your mom offers to help you bake new ones. That's a picture of God's forgiveness. Guys, God hates that we make crooked decisions because it makes the world a crooked and bad place to live. But instead of letting us carry the consequences of our decisions until they crush us, which is kind of what death is, God offers to help us carry the weight. And that's what Jesus claimed to be doing when he went to the cross. It says this in Titus chapter 2:14. Jesus gave his life to free us from every crime of sin or iniquity, to cleanse us and make us his very own people committed to doing good deeds. The only way for us to be made straight again was for Jesus to carry the weight of our crookedness on his shoulders on the cross in death. Jesus died the death our crooked behavior deserved. He was broken because of our brokenness, that he could offer us his life and transform us from crooked people back into the people God created us to be. Guys, that's why following Jesus changes the way we live, because we no longer drive on the crooked road, but we drive on God's straight and true road, hey, even if others don't. Yeah, guys, it can be super uncomfortable to think about how the Bible talks to us about iniquity. But here's what I loved about our quote from this week's Bible Project video. And I wanted to share it just as we head into the next part of our classroom. It said this: the good news of God's kingdom, it intentionally disrupts and overturns these patterns of iniquity. But it requires that we name our crooked failure, individually and corporately as a group. The only way we can open ourselves to becoming whole and upright by the healing power of God's grace. So guys, it can be uncomfortable to not just look out there and see iniquity and sin and transgression, but to see it in our heart. And so what we're going to do is we're going to take a look through the Bible at how the biblical writers use the word iniquity. And I think it's going to teach us something really cool about ourselves as well. And that's what a relationship with Jesus is. Because we don't want to just learn about the Bible, but we want to let God change us as we realize that we have crookedness in us too. And we can confess that to God and receive Jesus' forgiveness. Jesus carrying the weight with us so he can lead us to become new and changed people. All right, guys, I've written some Bible references on the board, and I hope you can see them. If not, I will make sure that they pop up on the screen here. But guys, what we're going to do is we're going to look through the Bible and see how the writers of the Bible use the word iniquity. When you come across something in the Bible that you don't understand, you can look it up and look it up how it's used in other parts. Let me give you an example. If I said the word lit, your parents would probably think, they're lighting something on fire on Sunday morning. No, that's not what we do in here, but we do really cool and epic things, and that's pretty lit. So if you go, maybe you don't know what that means, but if you go onto social media, you'll see that people, say, oh, that's super lit. Well, obviously we didn't light something on fire, but it's really cool. So if you run across something in the Bible you don't understand, you can look it up. And what we want to do is we want to get the big picture. We want to get the big picture of the Bible to see how the Bible writes one story that leads to Jesus and then invites you and I into the story. So we don't want to just make up words and put our own meaning to them. We want to see how all of the biblical writers use this word. Because I don't know if you knew, but the Bible wasn't written as one book. It was written over the course of 2,500 years. And so it's all these writers coming together, inspired by the Holy Spirit, who is God, and writing one story of God's people and how God is putting the world back together. Or, in our case, this week, how God is making something crooked back into something that is straight. So what we're going to do, guys, we're going to look them up. We're going to read them all together, and then we're going to figure out what they mean, okay? All right. So let's read the first one, Leviticus chapter 5, verse 1. Now Leviticus, it's in the Old Testament. It goes Genesis, Exodus, and then Leviticus. So it's right at the start, the third book in chapter 5, verse 1. Hey, let's look it up together. All right, guys, I've got two Bibles here because the Bibles that we normally use, they're a little bit more in everyday English. And so sometimes they don't translate the word iniquity into iniquity. They say something like sin because who uses the word iniquity in regular language? And that's okay, but sometimes it's helpful to actually see the actual word. So I got my other Bible here. It's a little bit harder to understand sometimes, but I'm going to kind of read out of both. Okay, so Leviticus 5:1. Now, it's really important when we're reading things to remember, hey, what's going on in the story when we're reading this? Because this was written a long time ago, not to you and me, but to a different people. And so this is God's people, Israel. And he's just brought them out of Egypt, brought them out of slavery, which is the story of the Exodus that you might know. And he's setting up these rules and regulations for how they're going to act as a country, but how they're going to have a relationship with God as well. But I think it's really interesting. So we'll get parts from all the parts of the story of the Bible. So Leviticus chapter 5, verse 1, and it's talking about, hey, when you have to go to court for something, or when you and a neighbor have a dispute, all right? If you're called to testify about something you have seen or you know about, so, hey, I saw two people get in a car crash, I got to go and give my story. It's sinful to refuse to testify. You will carry your iniquity.
it says punish for your sin. But remember, punishment in the Bible is often you're carrying the result of your own bad decisions. So it's saying, hey, if you lie, that's going to be really crooked and not a good thing, and those consequences are actually going to come back onto you, and you have to carry that lie and that guilt on your own shoulders, especially because it's going to affect other people. All right, let's read the next one. Leviticus chapter 18, 24 and 25. So same story, a little farther on. All right, in this part of the story, God's getting ready to bring his people into the promised land, so he brought them out of slavery in Egypt. They didn't have a home, but God had prepared a land for them that they were going to go and make their home, which is now the land of Israel. But there's a problem. There's some other people living there. And now this is like really, nowadays you couldn't just like march in and be like, I'm going to take over Edmonton because I want to live here. But back in the day it was pretty common. So, but what God says here is that by letting Israel come and take over the land, he's actually judging. And remember, judge means to let them carry the consequences of their own crooked behavior. He's judging the people who live in the land because they've become so evil, so crooked, so full of iniquity that God is going to let Israel come in and take over. So this is what it says. Don't defile yourselves or sin in any of these ways. For the people I'm driving out before you, they've defiled themselves in all these ways. Because the entire land has become defiled, I am punishing the people who live there. I will cause the land to vomit them out. Oh, isn't that like a gross image? It's like when we live so crooked, it's like even the land vomits us out, pushes us out, because it's not the way that God made it to be. You must obey all my decrees and regulations. You must not commit any of these detestable sins, which they've just talked about. This applies to everybody, Israelites and foreigners. All right, so hey, there's another use of the word sin and iniquity. Let's check it out what it says in Joshua 22:20. You might know the story of Joshua. Joshua fought the battle of Jericho. Okay, yeah, you get it. Yeah, flip it. The guy who blows the trumpets and the walls come tumbling down. Yeah, or they walk around. Anybody seen the VeggieTales where they're walking around and the peas are singing? Yeah, it's a little bit silly, but anyways, that's where we're going. Joshua 22:20. All right, in this one, guys, the people are in the land now. They've come in, they're taking over the land, and they're starting to settle. But somebody's greed got in the way. And when they took over Jericho, they weren't supposed to touch anything. None of the loot, it was all supposed to be given to God. And yet, somebody's greed, in somebody's greed, they thought that their way would be right. Because, hey, what's the big deal? I'm just taking a little bit of gold. And this guy Achan, he was greedy and he hid some gold in his tent. And because of it, not only did he have to carry the consequences for his crooked behavior, but his whole family did. Guys, sometimes, and this is what I'm learning from this one, is that it's not just individual brokenness that I have to carry, but oftentimes our actions, they affect our family, our community, and they affect other people. Other people have to carry the consequences of our crooked decisions. So let's read it. Joshua 22:20. Didn't Achan, the son of Zerah, break faith in the matter of devoted things? And God's wrath fell upon the whole community of Israel, and he did not die alone for his iniquity. Man, our crooked decisions, they affect our whole community. It could be some downer notes when we're talking about iniquity, but we're going to get to the good news pretty soon. But let's check out Matthew 7:3 and 23-28 to see what Jesus says about iniquity. All right, guys. Oops, I got the wrong one up on the board. It's chapter 7, verse 21. Okay, so Jesus, he's doing some teaching. This is in what we call the Sermon on the Mount. Jesus has got all his followers around him, and he's teaching them a few things. And he says this in Matthew chapter 7, verse 21. Not everyone who calls out to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven, Only those who actually do the will of my Father who will enter. On Judgment Day, many will say to me, Lord, Lord, we prophesied in your name. We cast out demons in your name. We performed miracles in your name. They did a lot of things for Jesus. But I will reply to you, I never knew you. Get away from me, you who break God's law. Or, in my other translation, it says, I never knew you, you who work iniquity. So it's almost like what they're doing, they're working hard. You know how maybe your mom and dad, they go hard and or they go to work and they work hard to maybe build a building or work at a bank, or you do homework, you work hard and you get your homework done. Well, it's almost like what these guys are doing and they're building is crookedness. It's like you built the building, but it's upside down, you know? And Jesus says that, hey, if you don't recognize that in yourself, I'm going to say I don't know you, which is really scary, but don't worry. Jesus also offers us grace so that we don't have to live in crooked ways. All right, let's check out the next one. Same thing in Matthew, but in chapter 23, verse 28. All right, you guys might know the Pharisees in the book of Matthew. They're the guys who are really religious, but Jesus kind of gets on their case a lot because, you know, they looked really religious, but on the outside, but on the inside, Jesus says they're filled with crookedness. And guys, our crooked behavior, it comes from not just doing crooked things, but it comes from a heart that isn't aligned with God. And that's what Jesus says here. So that adds to our picture of what does the Bible mean when it talks about iniquity. So let's read it. 23, verse 28. Matthew 23, verse 28. I'll start at verse 27. He says, woe to you. I don't know. Scribes and Pharisees, you hypocrites. Wow, he's not pulling any punches. For you are like whitewashed tombs, which outwardly they appear beautiful, but within are full of dead people's bones and all uncleanness. So you outwardly appear righteous to others, but within you're full of hypocrisy and iniquity. So it's like if you went to a graveyard, it looks really nice. There's flowers and stuff. But really it's a sad reality because, you know, it's people who are dead. And that's what Jesus is saying these guys are like. They might look really great on the outside, but God looks at the heart and he sees crookedness inside. And that's what's coming out in them, in their actions. All right, you don't have to flip here, but I want to read to you one more from the Old Testament. So I'm kind of flipping backwards here. But guys, this is a really cool passage in the book of Isaiah, who came way before, 400 years before Jesus. And he writes this poem about God's servant who is going to come, God's appointed servant who's going to come and save the people Israel from their sins. And it's a whole long thing. You can read it in Isaiah chapter 53. But I really, really like the image that it gives to us in Isaiah 53:6. It says, all of us, like sheep, have gone astray. We've turned everyone to his own way. You know, turning kind of that crooked path. And sheep, they like to run away, and they don't like to get stuck in certain ways. I own sheep, and they'd always get their head stuck in a fence, but they weren't smart enough to pull it back out. And it says this: we like sheep have gone astray, and yet God has laid on him, on the servant, the iniquity of us all. It's like in the video, God appoints a servant who is going to carry the weight of all the sins and all the bad, crooked decisions that we make on himself. And he is going to be the one who's crushed for our decisions, which doesn't sound very fair, but we're going to find out that that points to Jesus, who is God come in a human body, and he comes to be the one who carries our iniquity for us so that we can be set free, right? All right, this is our last verse, and this is where I want us to kind of land the plane. So we've kind of been going through, and maybe you've been writing down, hey, what does iniquity mean in Leviticus? What does it mean in Joshua? What does it mean in Matthew? What does it mean in Isaiah? And the last one I want to look at is Psalm chapter 32, verse 3 to 6. Maybe you've read some Psalms before, maybe Psalm 23, right? You know, the Lord is my shepherd. Maybe you've memorized some stuff out of the Psalms. this is one of my favorite songs because it is so real, and it just gives us this really cool picture of iniquity. Now, sometimes when we use these Bible words, they can feel not really connected to our life. But I love this is because the picture that the Bible gives of iniquity, it's so connected to my life and your life and everybody else. It's so real and honest and helps us explain like the suffering and evil in the world. It says this, and the guy writing the song, he writes this: "For when I kept silent." The guy who is writing the song, he says this: "Blessed is the one whose transgression is forgiven, whose sin is covered." We talked about those words. "Blessed is the man whom the Lord counts no iniquity, and whose spirit there's no deceit." Right? Because iniquity and deceit, being deceitful, those are really connected. And then he says this because he reflects on himself and he says, "I see that in me. For when I kept silent, my bones wasted away. My groaning was all day long. Day and night, God, your hand was heavy on me. My strength was dried up by the heat of the summer." I said, have you ever done something that you know was wrong, that you know was crooked? How do you feel? Just weighed down by guilt. And, lots of us deal with guilt right now. And that's how this guy was feeling. But here's what's really, really cool, guys, is that, remember, God doesn't just let us carry that on our own, but he offers to carry it for us when we confess it to him. And here's what the psalmist says next: "I acknowledged my sin. I didn't cover up my iniquity, my wickedness. I said, I will confess my transgressions to the Lord, and you forgave the iniquity of my sin." And that might sound really weird, but what he's saying is, and you carried the weight of my crookedness. It's just like the servant. It's just like Jesus, who goes to the cross, not because he had iniquity. He didn't do anything wrong. He didn't deserve to die. But Jesus goes to the cross to carry your and my brokenness, to be broken because of our crooked decisions. And so that we can have his life, because he didn't just stay dead, but he resurrected. I don't know about you guys, but as I read along here, I get this picture that maybe the word iniquity is a lot more applicable to my life than I thought at first. So why do we do this? When we come to the Bible, why do we flip around and go, where is it in this part? What does it mean in this part? What does it mean in this part? Because guys, this is why. We don't just want to make it up on our own. We don't want to just make up our own religion or just convince ourselves that we can say what God says, And the other reason is like, hey, maybe you don't use the word iniquity in regular conversation. I mean, who really does? But the reason that we do it is because the Bible wants to invite us into God's story. It's not just a book that exists in the past, but you and I are invited into God's story, and we're invited to see the world through God's way. And the word iniquity, as we kind of get this picture, it's like, oh, the crooked decisions that I make and the crooked decisions that others make, they make the world around me crooked and a really bad place to live. But God in Jesus is committed to making things straight again. And so when we confess, when we look inside of us and see that crookedness, when we accept Jesus carrying the crookedness for us, we can become who God made us to be. So what I want to challenge us with, because this is all practical, I want you guys to learn how to read the Bible, not just listen to me. So I want you guys to go through and look up all these verses, and what I want you to do is maybe write out in your own words what you learned today. Not in Bible-y words, we're learning about iniquity, but use your own words. And I want you to write out a definition of what you think iniquity means when you read through the Bible. Because guys, this is why we do this. God invites you into the story. Through Jesus, he offers you to carry your crookedness so that you can become the kind of person that God made you to be, so that you can share that message with others, so that you can live that way. And yeah, so that God can make the world from crooked back into straight. There's lots of bad things that happen in the world, but God is starting with you and me, and he's inviting us into that story. So do some reflection. If you got one of our kits, there's some spiritual reflection in there. And also, you can go online to MackenzieTownChurch.com/56, and you can find all the resources and print them out. I'd love if you guys had some conversation with your family, or sat down while you're doing our craft this week, and just thought about this and think about a couple of those things. Hey, where do I see crookedness in my world? Where do I see crookedness in me? And what does it mean to follow Jesus? How does he carry the weight of my iniquity? So, hey, we learned something new. Iniquity is a weird word, but I hope today that you get to see that maybe it is a lot more applicable to my life and your life than we ever thought. So, thanks so much for joining us, guys. We are so excited to be able to reach out and be in your house, even though, hey, it's just over video. And we can't wait till you guys can join us back here in the garage for 5-6. All right, have a great week, guys. See you later. Peace.